The knock came just after sunrise, sharp and confident, as if whoever stood on the porch already believed they owned the place. He opened the door expecting quiet country air, not three strangers staring back with practiced smiles and clipboards held like weapons. They introduced themselves as HOA representatives, though the property had never been part of any association. The lead woman spoke smoothly, explaining that joining the HOA was now strongly encouraged. She promised benefits, order, and protection, but her eyes searched the land behind him as if counting what could be taken. He listened without interrupting, calm, hands in his pockets, letting them finish their rehearsed speech. Then came the pressure. Fees were mentioned. Penalties hinted at. Deadlines placed on the table like traps. When he politely declined, the smiles faded. The woman's voice hardened, saying refusal would complicate things. She warned that compliance was easier than resistance, especially for someone living alone so far from town. What she didn't know was that this land had history. It had been earned, documented, and protected long before she ever learned the word enforcement. He told them he would not be joining and asked them to leave. Instead, they stepped closer, blocking the porch, claiming authority they didn't legally possess. As they finally walked away, the woman turned and said something chillingly calm. "We'll be back. And next time, we won't be asking." He watched their car disappear down the gravel road, knowing this wasn't over, not even close. By noon, the silence around the property felt heavier than usual, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He replayed the morning encounter in his mind, not with fear, but with disbelief. For years, this place had been nothing but peaceful soil, old trees, and inherited responsibility. Now, suddenly, strangers were claiming power over it. 2 days later, the warning became action. A black SUV rolled up the long dirt drive without slowing, dust rising behind it like a signal flare. 3 men stepped out, dressed plainly but moving with authority they hadn't earned. No smiles this time. No introductions. They walked straight to the gate and began inspecting it, taking photos, making notes. Speaking in low voices as if already planning changes, when he approached, one of them announced that they were enforcement contractors, sent by the HOA to resolve ongoing non-compliance. The words sounded official, but the documents they waved were vague, copied, and full of assumptions. They talked about fines, liens, and forced compliance, each sentence designed to intimidate. He asked one simple question: under what legal boundary did they stand on his land? The men avoided eye contact. One said the HOA had jurisdiction by development agreement, another claimed the maps proved it. He asked to see those maps. None were produced. Instead, they warned him that refusal would escalate matters and that cooperation would save everyone time. That was when he understood their tactic. They weren't here to prove ownership. They were here to exhaust him into surrender. He calmly told them they were trespassing and asked them to leave immediately. One man laughed and said, "You'll regret making this difficult." As the SUV drove away, he locked the gate behind them and placed a simple sign beside it: private property, no HOA access. What he didn't know was that someone had already made a call, one that would bring the truth crashing down on everyone involved. The situation escalated faster than he expected. By the next morning, neighbors he barely knew were standing near the fence, whispering, pointing toward the gate as if it were a crime scene. Someone from the HOA had spread a message claiming he was blocking access and violating community standards. None of it mentioned one small detail: the land was never part of their association. A printed notice appeared on his mailbox, stamped with HOA letterhead, declaring him non-compliant and warning of consequences if he didn't attend an emergency meeting. The tone was sharp, confident, and written as if authority were already settled. He read it once, then again, feeling a strange calm settle in. This was no longer confusion. This was a gamble on their part. He decided to attend the meeting, not to argue, but to listen. The room was crowded, tense, filled with people who believed a single version of the story. The HOA president spoke loudly about order, rules, and how no one is above the community. When his name was mentioned, heads turned, eyes narrowed. He was painted as stubborn, uncooperative, even threatening. When given a chance to speak, he asked a quiet question: "Can you show the deed that places my land inside your HOA?" The room went silent. Papers shuffled. The president deflected, saying the issue was under review. That answer told him everything. After the meeting, A woman approached him privately and warned that the HOA planned to escalate by involving authorities to force compliance. She said it like advice, but it sounded like fear. He thanked her and drove home, already making calls of his own, because while they were planning pressure, he was preparing proof. And once that proof came out, the story they had built would collapse loudly, publicly, and in a way none of them were ready for. The proof arrived in a thick envelope marked with official seals, maps folded with precision, dates stamped decades apart. He spread everything across the kitchen table, sunlight cutting through the window and landing on the boundary lines that told a very different story than the HOA's claims. The land had never been annexed, never agreed, never signed away. The lines were clear. The authority was not theirs. That afternoon, another notice appeared, this one taped boldly to the gate. It accused him of obstruction and warned that enforcement would return with local authorities present. The language was firm, almost smug, as if the outcome was already decided. He removed the paper slowly, folded it, and placed it in his pocket. This time, he was ready. When the vehicles arrived the next day, they didn't come alone. A patrol car followed the familiar black SUV, lights off but presence unmistakable. Neighbors gathered again, phones raised, curiosity buzzing through the air. The HOA president stepped forward, confident, rehearsed, already explaining the situation to the officer. Then he spoke. He handed over the documents calmly, page by page, map by map, pointing out survey markers, recorded deeds, and county filings older than the HOA itself. The officer studied them carefully, stepping aside to make a call. The confidence on the HOA president's face began to fade. Replaced by confusion, then concern, minutes felt longer than they were. When the officer returned, his tone was neutral but final. The land, he explained, was private and fully outside HOA jurisdiction. Any further attempts to control access would be considered unlawful. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The crowd murmured. The enforcers shifted uncomfortably. The HOA president said nothing, but the real shock wasn't the ruling, it was what the officer said next, something that made the HOA realize this was far from over. The officer cleared his throat and looked directly at the HOA president before speaking again. He explained that repeated complaints, false claims of jurisdiction, and sending enforcers onto private land could be interpreted as harassment. A formal report would be filed documenting everything that had happened so far. The words were calm, but their meaning hit hard. The HOA president tried to respond, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that boundaries were confusing and intentions were good. But the officer wasn't listening anymore. He advised them, clearly and publicly, to cease all contact with the property unless invited by the owner. Any further action would require verified legal authority. Without it, consequences would follow. As the patrol car pulled away, the black SUV stayed parked for a moment longer than necessary. The men inside avoided eye contact before finally leaving, slower than before, as if unsure of their place now. The neighbors dispersed too, conversations buzzing with surprise. Stories were already changing. That evening, an email arrived from the HOA board. The tone had shifted completely. Gone were the threats and deadlines. In their place were phrases like regret, review, and internal oversight. They requested a private meeting to clarify boundaries and move forward peacefully. He didn't reply. Instead, he posted new signage along the fence. Professionally printed, clearly citing county records and parcel numbers. It wasn't aggressive. It was factual. And facts, unlike pressure, didn't bend, but the HOA wasn't finished trying to save face. Behind closed doors, they were making decisions that would soon unravel everything they'd built. Decisions that would expose how far they'd gone and who had approved it. What the HOA didn't expect was how quickly the story would travel once documents became public. A neighbor filed a records request after hearing the officer's warning, and within days, emails began circulating that were never meant to be seen outside board meetings. Messages showed clear awareness that the land was excluded, followed by suggestions to apply pressure anyway in hopes the owner would comply to avoid trouble. The tone wasn't confusion. It was strategy. Local forums picked it up first. Then a regional blog that often covered property disputes ran a short piece titled "When Authority Overreaches." Names weren't used, but the details were unmistakable. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just dealing with one homeowner. They were answering questions from residents who believed dues were being used responsibly. An emergency board meeting was announced, closed to the public. That decision only fueled more suspicion. One board member resigned quietly the same week. Another deleted their social media accounts. The confidence that once powered the threats was gone, replaced by silence and damage control. Meanwhile, he stayed off camera, off comment threads, and out of arguments. He let paperwork speak. When asked for a statement, he simply said he hoped for accountability and peace. That restraint made the contrast sharper. One side looked calm and prepared. The other looked exposed. A formal letter arrived soon after, sent by the HOA's legal counsel. It acknowledged the boundary error, apologized for unauthorized actions, and confirmed that the property would be permanently excluded from any HOA communication or enforcement. It was everything he had asked for, written carefully, defensively, but one final detail inside that letter hinted at something bigger, an admission that would change the HOA forever, and give this story its final twist. Near the bottom of the letter, buried beneath formal language and careful phrasing, was the truth the HOA never wanted public. The board admitted that enforcement decisions had been made without proper authority, approved by a small group acting outside their own bylaws. To protect the association, they were dissolving that committee entirely and revising how power was used going forward. It was an attempt to quietly reset, but the damage was already done. Neighbors began stopping by, not to question him, but to thank him. Many had felt pressured for years, unsure where rules ended and intimidation began. His stand had drawn a line no one else knew how to draw. The gates stayed locked. The sign stayed up, and the land returned to what it had always been: quiet, lawful. And weeks later, a new HOA notice went out community-wide. It emphasized transparency, consent, and respect for property rights. There was no mention of him by name, but everyone knew. The authority they once waved so freely now came with caution and limits. Standing at the edge of his land one evening, he looked out over the property with a sense of closure. He hadn't set out to challenge anyone. He had simply refused to be pushed. And in doing so, he reminded an entire community that power without truth cannot stand, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.